DIY house rental contract. We comprehend that as another proprietor you should get overpowered while preparing your first property for occupants. Right now, you are ensuring that your home is prepared for your first since forever inhabitant. We don't need you to be ignoring the fundamentals and points of interest of leasing. This would incorporate all the things that you should remember for your rental contract. Indeed, even proprietors who have been doing business for quite a while can profit a mess from reconsidering their terms of rent sometimes. We have arranged a do-it-without-anyone's help tenant contract that you should be remembered for yours on the off chance that you are to make it a secure one. Investigate them underneath. Complete data about tenants. Your tenant contract ought to be comprehensive of the names and contact data of the considerable number of occupants that will live in your home. Occupancy term. It ought to incorporate the provisions of the tenure, that is on the off chance that it is occasional or fixed. Regularly, properties are leased on a month-on-month premise, as far as express 8 to 10 months, or yearly besides. As a rule, it's starting with one specific date then on to the next specific date, say, 1st August of this current year to the 31st of July of 1 year from now. This sort of tenure is what is known as a fixed-term rent. The other option is an occasional rent. This is one which can be recharged sans the inhabitant or the proprietor needs to sign a totally new agreement. The rent keeps on being substantial until either the inhabitant or the landowner gives a complete composed notification of sorts to end it. Whatever be your preferred occupancy terms, it must be shown in your tenant contract. Tenancy limits. Investment properties are commonly intended to just oblige a particular number of individuals. Remembering this, you should set an unquestionable requirement: follow inhabitants limit as a vital part of your tenant contract. Lease Basics. Your tenant contract needs to incorporate the measure of lease the occupant needs to pay. It ought to likewise incorporate how frequently the installment is to come. Normally, inhabitants pay lease on a month-to-month premise. Be that as it may, some of the time you may decide to get yearly installments, contingent upon the tenure term. Advance payment. You ought to request a harm store or a security store before you lease the property. You may likewise need to remember different things for your tenant contract, for example, a charge for late lease installment or a pet store, etc. Pet rules. A few landowners are increasingly accommodative of pets, and keeping in mind that some are most certainly not. Directly at the very beginning, your strategy with respect to pets ought to be clarified in your tenant contract. This ought to incorporate the quick and dirty and the points of interest about what kind of pets you permit. Restrictions. Inhabitants ought not perform troublesome exercises while living in a leased property. Be that as it may, you can be extra cautious by remembering limitations for such exercises in your rent. Guarantee. You incorporate provisos that totally restrict noisy clamor, general troublesome conduct and property harm in addition to other things. Maintenance. The best possible way to avoid any kind of confusion with regards to repairs in your property is to specify the details of it in your agreement. This can be done by including a repairs and maintenance clause in the rental agreement. Therefore, you should include clauses in it that outline. Specify who is responsible for what kind of repairs. Say, ideally you could include one particular clause that says how your tenant should go about keeping the rental property clean and another one to ensure that it is free of clutter and so on. To cite another example of things that you should include as part of the rental agreement, you could state that your tenant should not make any or major modifications to the property without your permission. Before installing an alarm system or say painting the walls, they should seek permission from you. Insurance policy. Occupant protection is of outrageous significance if inhabitants are to secure themselves and their own effects. It is anything but a matter of shock that most proprietors explicitly exhibit in their tenant contracts that inhabitant protection is obligatory. It's a serious chance that as your very own vital part protection arrangement for the property out on lease, you will be required to give verification for the benefit of your tenants. Other clauses. Different limitations that you should remember for the tenant contract are viewpoints. For example, if the inhabitant has the privilege to have flatmates move in, sublease the property, regardless of whether they can maintain an independent venture from inside the family and so forth. Nonetheless, that being stated, do remember that there are distinct cut-off points to what you can remember for your tenant contract and what you can't. Having said the entirety of that, we propose you look at Fractoz's home tenant contract generator. Simply follow a couple of simple advances, and you can have your tenant contract isn't over 2 minutes. In the event that you, despite everything, feel like that it is a ton of exertion, visit us. We handle all the desk work for your benefit. This incorporates everything from tenant contracts to expulsion. Takes note. In the event that you have a property lying empty, show it with us. We guarantee your property is all around kept up and you get to lease inside the 5th of consistently. Thanks. Think rentals, think Fractoz.